Hello. I cannot believe that week 1 is almost done. And there were a couple of little speed bumps to start. Obviously, that's going to happen. Some people, there were just some technical difficulties, which happens, right? So I've kind of been dragging my feet this week with finalizing the times for these talks and anything I want to remind you of, because there are people that they didn't get the email for whatever reason, just stuff like that, and I didn't want anyone to get left behind. So I think we have it figured out now. If you have questions, you can just keep posting them in the group. Updates with your runs, little mini wins. I talked about this, I think, on the most recent podcast, but I feel like everyone should be bragging. Just get super comfortable with it. Not just specific to running, but specific to anything. Because I feel like when someone's super comfortable saying like, yeah, I did XYZ, and I always have references, like I have examples that are running related, obviously, because that's everything to me, but I think it makes you more comfortable if you're talking to someone and they're super comfortable not crapping all over their accomplishments and they just can say it and own it. I think that is a good example. Just like it's a good example to be like that for other people. So continue. I love the updates in the group, the selfies, the screenshots, all of it. Celebrate every mile, every step. I'm all for it. I only have a couple of questions, so if you have questions, feel free to send them over. I think what I'm going to end up doing is, if we keep it to a couple questions each time, answering them both on Tuesdays and on Fridays, like the most recent on Tuesday, the most recent on Friday, so that you don't have to wait an entire week to get your question answered. Any other housekeeping stuff? Make sure that you have set a goal for the challenge, even if it is do every workout for the challenge or do every run, finish the challenge. Like, it doesn't have to be necessarily a time specific goal, but you should set a goal for the challenge, and it can be completing the challenge. So yeah, hopefully everyone will, but that's not always the case, right? And I'm going to ask what your goals are in a post, probably either tonight or tomorrow. That's kind of the homework, is to make sure that you just are able to say what your goal is. Why are you here? What do you want from it? If you don't want to announce it, because you don't have to. This is supposed to be fun. So if you are not comfortable, then you don't have to tell the world. You can just like write it on a paper and fold it up, put it under your pillow, so you dream about it every night. But make sure that you're able to say in 1 to 3 sentences specifically what your goal is, because if you're not clear about it, then it's just that much easier to be like, what's the point when you have a bad day or a bad week, right? Yeah. Okay. These are really good questions. So I'm excited about this because I feel like this is stuff that people always want to know. This one. Do you follow a specific meal plan? It says macros, calorie intake, etc. when you are training. You have mentioned that when you first started running, you wanted to lose 20 pounds, and you did. Would love some guidance on how to do that while running/training. I just seem to be hungry all the time and end up putting on more weight. Whereas if I was able to lean down a bit, I think I could be a faster runner. Most common question I get is really about weight loss, eating, meal plans, all of that. Excuse me. So when I am training for a race that I really want to show up for, if I'm training for a marathon, or a half that I'm really like, I want a PR. And it's more likely a marathon than a half that I would be really like pushing myself towards. I am not restricting anything. I'm not going to restrict calories. I do keep in mind macros, but it's not it's almost like the opposite of restricting them, in that I am keeping in mind macros to make sure that I have a good balance, because I have noticed, and this might be what's happening with you, that if my macros are off from what my body needs because of what I'm doing, my activity level, or just what my body needs, I keep feeling hungry, even though I'm pretty sure that I've eaten enough. I think I've fueled myself adequately, but I still feel hungry. Then I've noticed that it can be, technically I ate enough calories, but I didn't eat enough carbs or fat or protein, whatever it is, right? And so because your body potentially is like lacking something, it is giving you a hunger. And that's something that you need to pay attention to. So you might want to keep an eye on your macros. I wouldn't necessarily say like to cut anything if you are training, because this is this whole thing, right, where you really need to fuel yourself well. If you think you are hungry beyond what you need, like if you think it's an unjust hunger, like it's not really justified based on your size and activity level, then make sure you're hydrated. That's like the easiest way, is make sure that you are hydrated, which is more challenging to do in the winter potentially. And it's a lot more challenging now. I don't know where you guys are, but I'm in Southern California, and I did a bit, like I talked about this a lot in the summer, because everywhere that I would run, I used to have water fountains, and I knew where they were, and I felt super comfortable using them. And then suddenly, the beginning of last year, everything was shut down and I couldn't use those anymore. So I have a couple of videos about hydration, because this was something that I legit needed to figure out, especially on longer runs. So make sure that you're hydrated so that you're definitely not hungry, but really thirsty. That's the easiest one to kind of make sure, like, okay, that box is checked. I'm not hungry just because I'm thirsty. I think I'm hungry. And then I would look at making sure that your macros are good. And I think that there's always like a hot diet, right? And I feel like right now it is keto, a more kind of like protein, fat type of diet. And that's not ideal if you are training for an endurance sport. Like I would say more half marathon and marathon. That potentially isn't ideal unless you are first working to make sure that you're fat adapted, which is like a whole thing and more complex. That would be a different situation if you kind of already were there. But just based on kind of the information that we get oftentimes right now, it seems like runners, we joke about carbs a lot, but in all seriousness, like you need to make sure that you have enough, and definitely make sure that they're whole grain, whole foods, like as much as possible. Don't be eating processed foods, because sometimes that just makes you want more and more. But I would say make sure that your macros are in good balance. Use a journal. You can even just write in the meal planner, use that as a journal, and you might be able to figure out what your body is asking for, what it needs some more of. And sometimes too, every body is different. It can be a small tweak that can be like life-changing. Excuse me. Making sure that you eat after, especially like harder workouts, longer runs, within 30 minutes. That could like mean the difference between you. We got a guest. I left the door a little open because if not, he would have just like started to scratch on it and then thought, oh, she must not hear me. It's persistent. But making sure that you're eating within 30 minutes after, especially longer runs or harder workouts, might make a big difference. And or making sure that your macros are good. And one of the things that was very helpful to me was that almost on accident, where there was this period of time where I was trying to figure out, I was dealing with thyroid issues, and it's like, how are you going to lose weight if you have thyroid on top of everything else, right? But because of that, I did this time period where I cut out gluten. And so I needed to find other ways to fuel. And I ended up supplementing it with because I wanted to fuel with whole foods, like not all of the, gluten-free XYZ. So I ended up eating a ton of like nuts and nut butter. And I thought, oh, this is so calorie dense. But I realized I was like so full, like past lunch. Normally when I would have been hungry, it definitely was so much more satiating, and it was like something clicked and my body was like, yeah, that's kind of what you used to say, I'm always hungry. That was like, I was always hungry. It wasn't just like something I said, I definitely was. And just like super upping my fat intake just because I was like, I needed to replace like all of the kind of like cereal and breads and stuff that I was eating. And I replaced it with something calorie dense, but since it was like a ton of healthy fats, I realized that was so satiating. It was like a game changer for me. But every body is different. So I would use the meal planner as a food log and kind of assess, like on a scale of 1 to whatever you feel comfortable with, 10 or 5, how hungry you are. And you might also notice a pattern that there are days where you are hungrier than others. I am not hungry the day of my long run. Like after a long run, I'm thirsty all day. And this can be anything from 16 to 22 miles. That day, like I am not super hungry. The next day, I'm super hungry. Like day of, I'm just thirsty. And everybody is different. That's just like how it works for me. So you might notice that some days, like you think you're always hungry, but it might be certain days based on your activity level, what you're eating or drinking, any of those things. But yeah, hope that helps. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions. Okay, next question. Okay, this one is about heart rate and running. I'm wondering about heart rate and running. I gave you a little... Anyways, for starters, I'm 41 years old with a resting heart rate of 55, and I've been a runner for almost a decade. Should I be overly concerned with my heart rate during runs if my perceived effort feels easy? For example, I can have a breathy conversation and the run feels comfortable, but my heart rate will be in the 150s to 160s. Some running coaches would say that's too high for an easy run, but when I try to keep my heart rate below 145 to 150, I'm barely running anymore. It's more of a power walk. Thank you, and thanks for creating this space. Awesome. Since you have, I appreciate all of this information in this question because of the fact that since you have been running for, you said almost a decade, and it seems like you're pretty self-aware of your resting heart rate, of your effort level, of your heart rate when you are running what should be an easy run. Unless you really want to do like an extended training period based on heart rate, I think you can go with your effort level and not be so concerned with your heart rate. And yeah, I think it's fine. I think even when using, and I'm a big fan of the Maffetone method, but I think that that's a very long-term plan where, yeah, you kind of do slow down a lot for a while if you are just going to be trained based on that. And it's all just a long-term plan. This is all about endurance. And it's kind of under the assumption that you're going to want to continue to do long distance endurance training. So, and I feel like it's more like marathons, and you want to be able to maintain a lower heart rate as you get faster, training for long distances. But if you are aware of your effort level, and more than anything, and I feel like this is the big make or break with this kind of training, and this is like such a big challenge that it's like kind of the same thing. This question, I just feel like is very common when people start trying to do heart rate training, because ultimately, if it's slowing you down, even if you were kind of trying to do heart rate training with the best of intentions, you think it's potentially a good thing, you've been hearing great things about it, no one's going to stick with it. Like, I feel like I've heard running coaches try to use it for the first time and say, I felt so slow, I felt like it was tweaking my form, where they feel like they're just shuffling. And then it's like a mind F, right? So I think you're fine unless if you really want to do heart rate training for your own reasons. I would say do the Maffetone method and just like know that you're going to kind of have to hang out there long term. But if not, you realize, and again, because of the fact that you know your effort level, your resting heart rate, that you can have a conversation, I don't think you should be concerned about it. Like, I don't think, yeah, I think it's fine. I think that it kind of is hard to do heart rate training unless you're just kind of all in with it. And that's hard to do if you feel like you are trying to pay attention to heart rate, but doing more of basically, I'm barely running, it's more of a power walk. And especially too, if you are in a hilly area, I pause because I feel like I say that, hilly. I'm like Valeria Baldwin. I don't know if you guys know this, but I guess I know nothing about her, but she was like pretending to be from Spain, but she would pretend an accent, but she also pretended like she didn't know common English words, even though she grew up in Boston. I wasn't pretending like I didn't know the word hilly. I feel like I say certain words funny. Anyways, so I paused. No, I forgot my train. Oh, also, if you're in an area with a lot of hills, it is so hard to keep your heart rate down. Like, oftentimes our heart rates just go up in areas if you're running up a hill. So it's just like, if you already feel like you are doing a power walk, then you're going to be doing like a power stroll up any area with hills. So yeah, unless it's important, unless you're like, I really would love to just be training by heart rate long-term going forward. In that case, I would say just go with the Maffetone method. Like, this is going to be your new Bible kind of thing, and you just follow that to a T and just be patient with it. But if not, I am all about effort level. I think that effort level, there are times where I feel like my watch needed a update, like a software update or something, and I realized like my watch is off more than I think, just based on knowing my effort level and knowing the area where I run, right? Where you know how fast kind of you're going, you know your pace, you know your effort level. You know if you're having a more challenging day than others, which happens. But I think that effort level can be such like a super helpful thing if ideally you want to get faster or see if you can push yourself more. So I wouldn't let it keep me up at night. And the next question. I will put a link if anyone's interested though in heart rate training to like kind of like a Maffetone 101. And actually the next Friday, I have a podcast coming out with a friend who is super into macros and all of those things. And I'm calling it Macros 101 because I wanted to because I figured that with your question to the first question asker, I assume that you knew, obviously, because you're asking about macros, you knew it. But if anyone needs like, what are you guys even talking about? next Friday, there's a podcast that's like Macros 101. Like, this is what we are basically talking about. And it was specifically like Macros 101 for runners. Tongue twister. Okay. And this one says, it's just pretty simple. Not a lot of information. I'm not sure if I should do the 5K or 10K training plan. Any thoughts? How do I figure it out? This kind of goes to the question that I added into Tuesday's training video. Ultimately, and the question from the last time too said, I'm really torn between training for a half versus health and wellness. What running ability would you recommend? Ultimately, I think it kind of depends on you, because in terms of the running ability, if you are able to run, if you have been running 3 to 4 days a week, then I think it's ultimately like just based on, do you want to do you want to end up running more, or do you want to, and this was in the messages, someone asked something to this effect too, 5K versus 10K. And it also can be a question of, do you want to focus on speed right now, or do you want to focus on endurance? And what is your long-term goal? Which kind of ties in with the whole thing for this week in terms of SMART goals. Like, you can accomplish a lot in 12 weeks. You can train for and run a half marathon. You can train to PR a certain distance. You can definitely, if you wanted to lose weight, you can change how you look, you can change how you feel. There's like so much you can do. But you can do anything, but you can't do everything. So you kind of have to figure out what is your main priority and how hard do you want to work for it. So if you work here because you want to just kind of get back, like you need like me to be behind you, like, go, come on, like, let's get started, because you haven't been running for over a year, then you might want to take a more just consistency type of approach, where you're just like, I just want to make sure that I do every one of the 5K runs. If you have been working out consistently, running consistently leading up to this, and you want to push yourself to something new, then I would say do the more challenging plan. But self-awareness is a superpower. Like, if you are aware of like how committed you are right now, then that's going to save a ton of stress and confusion, because it is 1,000% okay to do the 5K training plan, the level 1 training plan. If your goal is like consistency, like I want to show up every day and make sure I do it, then yeah, choose one of those plans. But hey, the thing is that I can't tell you what your goal should be, because I can't do the work for you. So, and again, this is like the question, this is the homework for week 1, is what is your goal? Like, be able to name it, chime in, because I'm going to ask, but if you don't feel comfortable chiming in, then write it down for yourself. But it's so important, and it is going to make a big difference at the end of the program, like how good you feel, if you feel like you accomplished what you set out to accomplish. So yeah, that was the last question though. So what I will do is, if you have a question for next time, put it in that form. I'll link to it again, or I'll try to keep it towards the top. I also wanted to remind you, use the running log. Someone had said something about going out for the first run and their foot hurt. And I put, like, I replied to it. I didn't see it until the next day, and I replied to it, and I was like, you put everything in this running log. And that applies, like, you can obviously go past that line. If you have a lot to say, then say it. Because ultimately, you are writing a training book for yourself. that you can use later. If you are training for a 10K right now because you want to run a half marathon later this year, and you figure out all of the stuff, all of your little speed bumps during the 10K training, so that your half marathon training in the fall is like smooth sailing. Like, you understand if you have a certain sports bra and it's like chafing under your right arm or whatever it is, write that in the log. If that only happens on superhuman days, write that in the log. Like, the more you can kind of figure out, the better. When you are feeling great, there's a running song that happened to come on and you were able to like sprint the last quarter mile. If there's an area that you notice your heart rate is higher because there was like a dog that chased you one time, this is applicable to me. There's like certain places where I walk around my parents' house and I know, I'm not watching my heart rate, but I know that if I was, it would probably be a little higher. Like, I'm a little more stressed, like, because this is where like a dog bit my mom or something like that. Little things like that, though, can be helpful. And if you feel sore, if something is painful, write everything. Like, write your own, the most important thing is your own kind of scale and measure. So do it in terminology that you are going to be able to reference and understand how painful it was. If it's pain, if it's soreness, if you think it's a mindset thing, like, I just did not feel like running, and this is why. Whatever it is, this is going to be very helpful to you. Yeah. So just make sure you're using the running log. If you, to the number one question asker too, like I said, you can use the blank meal planner to actually as like a food journal, if that's something that you kind of want to keep track of, along with your hydration. Make sure that your goal is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time sensitive. So that is something you can do in these 12 weeks. Set a goal for this challenge. Tonight or tomorrow, I'm going to post asking what your goal is. So write it down somewhere. And yeah, if you have any questions, just put them on the form that I will put up at the top. And I think that's it. Unless you guys have any other questions. I feel like I'm missing a couple things. There are probably going to be people joining tonight or tomorrow. Like, there was just a couple of emails that didn't go through. Most of them we caught right away. But if we didn't, we might be meeting just like a couple of new people. But outside of that, yeah, have a good week. Have a good run this weekend.